Well, hello and welcome to Year with Jesus. We're going to continue for a little while in the Gospel of John. We're going to leave the Galilee region in the north and its various country towns and go south to the main city of Jerusalem. Jesus went to Jerusalem at least 3 times in his public ministry, and the Gospel of John features his ministry in Jerusalem more than any other gospel writer. As I've mentioned before, it becomes difficult to plot the events of Jesus' life on a timeline because the gospel writers, for the most part, have a purpose in writing that has nothing to do with chronology. Sure, they have his birth at the beginning and his death at the end and a loose chronological order in between, but they tend to group events in themes, or they collect a few events that happened at a particular place, regardless of the chronology, and put them together. Let's read John's opening story about Jesus' first ministry in Jerusalem. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Well, let's just stop there for a moment. In a previous episode, I discussed the significance of the word "up" here in relation to the geography of Palestine and Israel. So the towns of Nazareth, Cana and Capernaum, which have all featured in sessions so far, are all in the Galilee region. Now the story shifts to Judea and specifically the city of Jerusalem, which had been the centre of religious worship since around 1000 BC. Jerusalem is referred to as up from Galilee because it sits at 754 metres, and it can get cold. It actually can snow there. Galilee, on the other hand, is at 212 metres below sea level, so you really are going up. And when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem, what did he find? In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Jesus had been to the temple at least once before this event. He was dedicated to God here as a baby. He was there as a 12-year-old boy, and here he is for the first time in his adult years, the first of several visits that he would make during his public ministry. The temple in Jerusalem was the centre of public worship. In the towns and villages, there were the simple prayer houses or synagogues, but the temple was something quite different, a huge complex with a long history. At first, the Jews didn't have a temple. They had a tent of meeting or tabernacle, which during the 40 years of wilderness wanderings was a portable structure that could be packed down and set up again in a short time. Then when the Israelites entered Palestine, they set up a tent of meeting at a place called Shiloh. Then Israel's third king, Solomon, built a temple of worship in Jerusalem. This was later destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and about 100 years later, a new temple was built on the same site, and that temple was known as the Second Temple. In Jesus' time, this Second Temple was modified and improved by Herod and was known as Herod's Temple. People would go to the temple to make sacrifices for various things, and rather than bring your live animal 200 kilometres for the sacrifice, you could purchase one on site. If you would come from far away and you didn't have the local shekel to make payment, then you could go to the money changer right there in the temple courts and do the foreign exchange. It ended up becoming a lot less about worship and a lot more about ripping the people off right there under the noses of the religious leaders who were in on the raw. We see here Jesus being very critical of what was going on, so he made a whip of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins and the money changers and overturned their tables. Can you imagine the scene? Jesus was not a nice person. Jesus was not a polite person. Driving out the corrupt money changers and clearing the temple courts of the clutter of marketplace so that it could be reclaimed for worshippers to gather was a forceful act which got a lot of people offside. Keep in mind, the temple courts was the area of the temple that Gentiles, that is non-Jews, would gather. As non-Jews, they weren't permitted to enter into the temple proper, so this was the next best thing. However, with the place being turned into a profit-making bazaar, it denied the Gentiles a place to gather and worship the Jewish God, which many Gentiles enjoyed to do. So, of course, the religious people were incensed. What makes you think you've got authority to do this? Show us a sign to prove that you're a prophet. His response is interesting. Destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. They're like, it's taken 46 years to finally get this thing completed and you think you could do that in 3 days? But the temple he was speaking of was his body, which the disciples understood after his resurrection from the dead. So here we have Jesus likening his body, himself, to the temple, which is all a bit intriguing. This second temple in Jesus' day was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. From then until now, there has never been a Jewish temple on that site. Currently, what's known as the Dome of the Rock is built upon that site. However, today, if you go underneath what is known as the Western Wall, you can see the absolutely massive Herodian foundation stones which are still there from Jesus' day, supporting the whole structure of the Temple Mount 2,100 years later. Now, it's also interesting to note that there is a movement today called a Third Temple movement, which is a movement among both Zionists and some Christians to raise funds for the building of a third temple. They see this as a fulfillment of prophecy, and they have a large public office in Jerusalem with banners and everything, and you can buy heaps of merch and donate to the building of the third temple. Now, the one little problem, of course, is that the current site is under the management of the Jordanians, and you can't just remove the Dome of the Rock. Although, who knows, maybe it will happen. Personally, I think it's a load of bunkum, and that the fulfillment of the third temple has come in the person of Jesus Christ. And next episode, I'm going to show you why. See you in the next episode.